How do you coach men to stay in control of their emotions?
You know, you're just having a very innocent conversation. It seems like things are perfectly normal, and all of a sudden it's devolved and unraveled, and I'm like, how did we get here? What did I say? You know, what just happened?
Don't naturally assume and accuse when she comes to you with questions or concerns. Don't do that. And if you are already conditioned to do that because this is a cycle you've fallen into, here's a little change of method for you to approach this conversation the next time.
You're an incredible wife. You do so much for us. I'm just worried that maybe you're getting a little worn out, and I've noticed I'm feeling that there's distance here. Is that right? You know, and so like what you've done there is I've acknowledged her goodness. And
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on another episode here at The Catholic Gentleman. Devin and I, we're just so blessed to be able to bring this to you. Thank you for tuning in. We hope that something we say provides you with a bit of value and helps your life, right? That's why we're doing this. So we're your hosts. I'm John Heinen. We got my friend, author, speaker, amazing man, Devin. How are you doing, Devin?
Not amazing, man, but I'm doing all right. Yeah.
Yeah. Humble man.
Not that either. I wish I was. Yeah. I got a lot of work to do there, but we'll get there.
Next week's episode. No, I'm joking.
Yeah. Right on.
So today I want to talk about, I bet you've asked yourself, why does she come to me with these questions, with these problems, if she actually doesn't want a solution, right? Mm-hmm. Have you ever found yourself saying things like, gosh, that's not what I meant, or why does it always turn out like this? And I'm here to tell you, if that's you, you're not alone, and we're going to talk about that today in this episode. So please like and subscribe if you like what we're doing. If we add any value to your life, please share this with other men that could benefit from the conversations that we're having and the material that we're putting forth. If you were looking for something in a group to donate, we would love anything that you give us, definitely with prayers. Honestly, first and foremost, that's all. And it's noticeable when our listeners and individuals such as yourself are praying for us. And if you're looking to donate, came out with Catholic Gentleman Plus a couple of years ago. There are now 29 unique sessions for men. We're coming out next month with what it means to be a husband. We have other ones such as work or spiritual combat. We've got courage. We've got guest experts. We've got a lot of great stuff happening inside of there. I think you'd enjoy it. It's CatholicGentlemanPlus.com. So we received a ton of positive responses, but also questions from our last episode on the number one reason wives pull away. So thank you, everybody who sent us your questions at podcast@CatholicGentleman.com. We've read them all. We appreciate them. We will be coming out with more episodes associated with some of these questions and concerns. But I actually heard from wives, and I actually heard from husbands, and there's like such a gray area, and there's such middle areas, and there's free will, and there's virtue, and there's the spiritual workings within everyone's life. And so, but I just want to pause and just thank everybody and know that you've been heard, and that we're praying for you, and that we'll be coming out with more content just in line with this to touch on some of those very true and very important issues. And so, like this one, discussing things with your wife. You're going to have to discuss important stuff with our wives, right? We do it all the time, from finances to in-laws to holidays to parenting to even sex, right? We have a whole episode on that. That these are the things
multiple episodes on that.
Yeah, exactly. These are such important things, and men often fall into two extremes, right? Where they like lean in harder and they enter into the conflict. They raise their voice. They get incredibly systematic or ordered. They get divided from their spouse, or maybe they avoid these conversations altogether. They get kind of like insular. They're not looking. They want to keep peace, or they just don't want to enter into conflict, and so they do that. And then, of course, there's all the gray area in between. And so Devin and I, we come out with these 5 different practical tools that we should all use.
So is this this is how to win an argument every time with your wife, or win in the
every time? Exactly. the end goal is we are in it to win it, and
we have to win at all costs. Yeah,
exactly. And actually, thank you for that. That's a good framing, Devin, because the episode right now, we want to kind of frame it around like disagreements, problems, difficulties with our wives, like these conversations. And so we've got 5 things here. So Devin, how has conversations over the many years with your wife gone?
How have they gone? Oh my gosh, every direction. But I relate to what you said at the beginning, how, you're just having a very innocent conversation. It seems like things are perfectly normal, and all of a sudden it's devolved and unraveled, and I'm like, how did we get here? What did I say? What just happened? And pretty soon resentment is building, the silence is building, and then, get me the divorce papers, I'm ready. It feels like that sometimes. It's like, so how do we get there? And I think it's just really, we're missing each other big time. We're, my wife and I, we would be missing each other, and there's a lot there, and I think we're going to get into why not only my wife and I are missing each other at times, but why couples do. But I think right off the bat, just in that context of, like, hey, we're here to win the argument, we're here to win the discussion. I think that if you really want to win, you have to be ready to lose. It's kind of like the spiritual life. If you really want to be great, you have to be humble. If you really want God to make you into something like a large saint, you have to be little. And so it's that great paradox where we think in worldly reasoning says you have to be one way. Godly reasoning is like, nope, I've got the solution. It's exactly the opposite of what the world's going to tell you. And it's like that right here is like, you want to win the argument. Actually, you'll win by losing.
This is so good. I mean, the first shall be last and the last shall be first. And he who loses his life gains it. And it's so true. Again, here's my problem actually, and I just don't mind starting out like this. I'm a very analytical, solutions oriented. Okay, men come by this very natural.
No way, John. I would have never seen that.
Yeah, exactly. And so temperamentally though, my identity was so often found in outcomes and in solutions. And I brought that into our marriage, right? Even though I'm aware that I'm a beloved son of the Father and that I'm working towards just resting in that truth, when I get into disagreements with my wife, it's somehow like removing my identity, which praise be to God it is, right? Like I realize this, but in those moments when emotions are high, it's like if I'm not proving my point,
right,
then I'm somehow not winning. But actually, there's like this distorted, very demonic, but like I'm actually not leading, right? Like I'm not actually entering into my role, which is just a total misunderstanding of relationships in general. Yeah. And that's been hard for me. That's been the hardest thing for me. It's still there. And I prayed about it this morning. I actually talked about this episode with my wife this morning. I just walked through some of these points. And as I was walking through the points, she's like, John, like, you're far more emotional in the moments than you are conveying in this. And she's right. Like, again, I'm not acting when I'm here on the podcast. And so, but that's I guess what I'm getting to is like relationships are different than math problems, and working on our own personal virtue helps, but working on our relationships and the virtues built within relationships is so necessary and so needed, and something that I'm constantly been wrestling with and have for years and still am, is how to approach a conversation without a list of solutions perfectly already decided and aligned in my brain. And now it's just about which one is she going to get behind.
Yeah, hey, baby, I got you A, B, and C. Pick one.
That's right.
Yeah.
It hasn't been working, Devin.
No, it's not going to work. And so I think as men, we kind of operate on two, well, obviously there's way more than this, but just super simplistic kind of overarching kind of view is when we get in a discussion in which our thoughts are not aligning with our wives. There's the intellectual side in which we sense that we are losing control of order, and the proper solution is not coming about. We're not aligning on that. So there's that intellectual side that creates a frustration in the man, because men tend to be more ordered, like you're saying, the solution based. And so that's kind of more the intellectual approach. But then there is the heart approach, or the
Yeah.
emotional approach. And that's where we feel disrespected. So even if she's not actually disrespecting us, she's just disagreeing, which is totally valid, right? I mean, she's her own person.
Yeah.
She has her own thoughts. In fact, like my wife is much, I truly believe this. She has a practical, sensible wisdom that's far beyond mine. She's amazing. She has the gift of counsel. And, and so if she disagrees with me, that's perfectly valid. I need to validate that. But what happens emotionally is there's this trigger of, oh, I'm being disrespected. She isn't giving credence to what I'm bringing to the table here. And then that's when that resistance can come in an emotional standpoint. So I think we can have resistance on an intellectual standpoint, emotional standpoint. I'm losing control, losing order, or on the other side, I'm not being respected, therefore rejected. And now I'm going to put my foot down, or I'm going to leave, or I'm just going to be silent and stonewall,
It's so good. And this builds up. Actually, I'm going to skip the first one and I'm going to go to the second one, because this is Satan's number one trick here, right? He's the deceiver. He is the is the in the divider, and this is exactly what he wants. And so if he can get us to, we kind of fall into this cycle, right? Where that happens once, then that exact same thing happens twice. And then if you are married, that happens like 5 dozen times. And then you get in this cycle of assumptions and accusations first, right? Where we see our wife with kind of the this idea that she's always against us. She's always against me, right? That like she's always voicing her opinion in just direct opposition, just for the sake of being in direct opposition to us. And that's exactly what Satan wants you to hear. There's exorcists talk about this all the time, because if he can divide the family, if he can divide the husband from the spouse, if he can divide the father from the children and segment him, he's easier to take down. He's also breaking down the foundational unit of society and God's plan for mankind. And that's what he's going at. So when your wife comes to you with a problem or concern, and your first thought is like, she needs to learn how to answer these things herself, or like, why is she always bugging me with this sort of stuff, right? You see her in opposition instead of in love. You don't see her as your teammate. You don't see her as, and so that's where I enter into this one here. Do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment, avoiding assumptions and accusations first, asking questions, being that listening ear is one of those 5 things. And something you just stated about your wife being her own person with her own discernment and her own thoughts, and it's beautiful and necessary within marriage, is often seen with opposition. We fall into this hamster wheel, and then we end up just always seeing that conflict before that's even brought itself up. Like it's not her natural intention. And so we look to go to battle against our wives instead of being on the same unit with our wife, if that makes sense. So
makes perfect sense. And I think that where we err is because we have a hypersensitivity to her sarcastic or biting or critical comments, because there's water under the bridge. Let's face it, in every marriage, there have been comments, or there have been things that have been said that have made us feel a little bit insecure, inadequate, or maybe have like pointed out like an error or a fault or even a sin, right? And so when she's speaking innocently and she's trying to express her opinion, we can easily just, because we're triggered, we can easily think, oh, here she goes again. She's criticizing my character. So let's just clarify, just so that everyone hears this. The first one we're mentioning of these 5, the mistake is entering into the conversation with assumptions and accusations in our mind, in our heart. And the actual resolution to that, you're saying, is to ask good questions before accusing and assuming. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Thank you, Devin. And I know I just jumped right in there because the spirit
Oh,
was
it's
moving
great.
me, but
No,
you're,
no, I
yeah,
just
exactly
really
right.
good.
I'll say, yeah, to clarify. So, what we need to be doing as men is we need to first and foremost put ourselves in check. So when our wives are coming to us with these questions or these concerns, we need to stop and reflect and say, why is she asking this of me now? Because she loves me. And then I would actually argue, if you're on that hamster wheel, which happens to all of us, that you should then pray, that you should literally have a quick prayer, have something like, Lord, help me respond as you would have me
Yes.
respond. Or Holy Spirit, come upon me so that I might do and say what you would have me do and say, and nothing else, right? And it's just those little prayers or something, because then you can ask her the questions that can open that conversation up for a good dialogue. So yes, don't naturally assume and accuse when she comes to you with questions or concerns. Don't do that. And if you are already conditioned to do that because this is a cycle you've fallen into, here's a little change of method for you to approach this conversation the next time with an air of love.
Yeah, that's good. A friend of mine, he says when his wife is saying things that he is just getting under his skin, he says, I have two options. One, I can be silent like an ass, or I can open up my mouth and prove that I am an ass. And I love that. It's just so true. One of the things that has really helped me a lot, and I got this from a spiritual director, and it proved really practically to be valid, is instead of saying, like, when you enter the conversation, so when we operate from accusations, and what was the other one? Accusation and assumption.
Assumptions. Yeah.
Okay, so right there we're in blame mode. Okay, I'm not feeling good about this, you're to blame. Okay, so what we do then is we move from the assumption accusation to blame mode, and that blame mode then is expressed by, you did or didn't do this, or you do or you always do, or you usually do this or didn't do that, or why did you say, whatever it is. What he told me is, instead of saying you did or you do, he says begin with I feel, because what we're doing is we're moving out of the realm of the action and the behavior that someone else has done, and we're just saying I feel. So for example, maybe my wife is being distant, and I feel that, and I'm noticing that, and maybe it's very real, right? But rather than accuse her, say, hey, why are you pulling back from me? Why are you distancing yourself from me? Did I do something wrong? No, instead I say, I've been feeling like maybe we're getting a little distant here. I've been feeling that. Is that true? Um, and or instead of saying, gosh, why are you angry about finances all the time? Instead saying, hey, I feel like maybe you're a little bit upset about that. Is that true? And that gives our wives the opportunity to then have the freedom. You've opened up. Okay, well, let me tell you how I feel, or let me tell you what's going on, rather than being, you did, you do, you always do, you never do, and that's not going to get us anywhere.
Agreed. I think that's excellent. I actually am going to have to try and take that to heart and think through that. I appreciate you sharing that because I don't do that. And so,
John, you need to do
I
this.
know. I feel so. No, that's really good. Devin, I wanted to get your thoughts, inspired by one of the questions email that we received. Is what if we have men that are staying in control of their emotions and doing this repeatedly over and over and over, but because we have been conditioned to be in this fight mode, so has our wife, and our wife doesn't believe us or doesn't seem to be responding, and we're talking not just once or twice we've improved our thought process and not coming to this with assumption and accusation, but like 25 times, and it just doesn't seem like she's getting on the same page as us. How do you coach men to stay in control of their emotions and to continue doing it anyways? What are your thoughts to that?
Well, yeah, so it's very difficult, but so there's a couple things. Number one is that our interior life gives our exterior life form. And so a lot of times we make these changes that are very behavioral minded or mode, like a behavioral mode. Like, okay, I'm not going to get upset. So I'm going to deep breathing. I'm going to count to 10, all this stuff that the psychotherapists tell you to do. And, pause before you respond, all that. Okay, great. That's all superficial human behavior that can help. But if it's not coming from the depth of your soul, because our body expresses our spirit, if my soul is not in line with Jesus on the cross, the crucified Christ, then I'm really not giving anything but myself, and I'm a fallen human being. So, what I need to do is I need to have a rich prayer life, which we talk about all the time, but then I also need to fast, and I need to fast for the intention of my marriage, but also for so that I come in contact with my poverty, my weakness, and then also I can open myself up. The more I fast, the more I can open myself up to God actually dwelling in me, because I'm making space. I'm carving out the flesh. I'm making space for the spirit. I love this. I just heard this the other day. A young man, this guy's wise. He was talking to this priest, this Franciscan friar. He says, "Do I fast like twice a day? Like, do I skip, like 2 meals? Do I just not eat for a week? What's the fast?" He says, "Just be hungry." And I love that, because it's like, just feel that ache, that hunger, whatever it is, that thirst. Okay. So what's the advice? You got to have a great prayer life. And that doesn't mean you're great at prayer. It just means that you're dedicated to it, and that's where the power comes from. You need to sacrifice in the flesh, so that, because if you can't say no to a cupcake or to a bourbon or to a cigar, there is no way you're going to be able to be calm in front of your wife. And so that's the second thing. Third thing is also this, and I get that same question, or a question similar as you just mentioned, from a lot of guys, especially at conferences when I talk, retreats. My wife doesn't believe me. My wife is checked out. Our marriage is not changing. And it's very interesting, because these guys usually, they have some other endeavor that they're really good at. Like, they could be like a leader in their ministry, or they could be like a coach or something like that. And I found that these guys, even though Mary was completely faithful to Joseph and Joseph was completely faithful to Mary, and they loved each other, Mary was, in a sense, not only a blessing but a cross for Joseph. And so this is where these guys and all of us can learn from Joseph. Is like, Joseph had the cross of celibacy. Joseph had the cross of Mary being right, all the time. Joseph had the cross of Mary being perfect. And, he had his own perfection, but it just wasn't lining up to that height of perfection. And so there's a lot of struggles there for Joseph, right? And so what do we learn from this is that, as men who feel like our wives don't want us to lead, our wives aren't responding, we can we can align ourselves to St. Joseph's spirituality and say, "Man, I am so poor in my spirit. I am so weak. And so I turn that over to you, Lord. And I want my wife to see you come through me, because I don't have this." And what I found is, when guys do this, they become like these strong, silent witnesses, and it's undeniable to their wives, even if their wives are digging in their heels. Okay. It's undeniable. And sometimes the wife will come around, or she's just deplorable and she refuses. But just remember this, guys, that even though you may be taking the hit at home, all that suffering, if you receive it in your poverty, God is going to bless you in many other endeavors in which the grace comes out, has to bear fruit. So that can actually be the fuel and the power behind what other ministry or things you got going on.
This is so good, because we always just want to control situations. We want to control our spouse in this one, but you're exactly spot on in the fact that in the end, we can't idolize marriage. We can't idolize what we think it should be, because when the rubber hits the road, when reality faces, every single relationship is different. And some crosses are greater than others in those seasons. And so we have to put on the mind of Christ, take captive these thoughts, and and do good anyways, and keep at it. So I think that's so
Well,
good.
just remember the goal here is, yes, the goal is to have a great marriage. That's a tertiary or a secondary goal, really. The real goal is for you to be a saint. The real goal is for you to have union and
That's right.
communion with God.
God.
And that does not come absent of the cross. It comes by means of the cross. And a lot of times the marriage, unfortunately, can be that cross, that is that Calvary that leads to the resurrection and glorification. And I've seen this for a lot of guys who embrace it. Yes, it's painful. Yes, it's torturous, but they seem to operate at a level of peace and joy that's inexplicable, that you cannot have from worldly resources or answers. But you're right. If you treat your wife, sex, marriage as an idol, that idol will betray you. I don't care how great your marriage is now. That idol will betray you, because what poses as God and you go to as God to derive what God can give you, it ultimately fails at giving what God can ultimately give you, which is peace and joy, satisfaction and fulfillment. That idol will betray you because it cannot do what God can do.
Yes. So I want to move on to the next one here. And this is going back to the first one, which was when you approach an argument with your wife or just a disagreement, right? It doesn't always have to be an argument. Let's say argument in a philosophical sense. When you approach a disagreement with your wife, you're talking to solve her versus talking to love her. And so I really wanted to enter into that because I was reading in 1 Corinthians, obviously, love is patient and kind. Love does not insist on its own way.
There you go.
And very often we come into these, you said it earlier, Devin, that like our interior is reflected in our exterior. It was more eloquent than that. But I know St. Augustine said, by your speech, your heart is revealed, and it's the same thing that like, if we approach a situation rushing to fix her, to reorient her mind, she's always thinking like this, and I need her to think like this, etc. If we're trying to solve her, if we're men, we're being honest, this does happen. This is absolutely something that we just naturally fall into. We need to instead do this, right? We need to slow down. We need to listen fully to understand. Dr. Greg Bottaro talks about it. Dr. Bob Schutz talks about it. We need to actually repeat back before we say anything. We need to ask a clarifying question before we say everything, even if you think you know what's going on, right? If you are not leading with this sort of charity, you are going to just constantly be in disagreement and so, Devin, I know so many men that feel like if they're not trying to solve a problem, or in this case, solve a person, that they're failing. So how do you coach men, when they're feeling useless in that moment, or, when they're, trying to rethink like this?
Okay. So it's kind of back to that idea that we think that we're great men and real men when we solve a problem, achieve something, have an accomplishment. And that's really great when that happens. However, if you look to Christ, what is it that we revere Christ for? We revere him for having the most apparent failure that he was able to endure. He had complete poverty on the cross, naked, alone, ashamed, torn up, literally beaten. There was nothing glorified in that, really, in the sense. Yet we hail him as the one who endured the pain, who endured the poverty of the cross, right? So I think that that's where we have to go in this, is like, look, we have to realize we're not God, and Jesus was God, and God didn't even control. It didn't even come up with like a solution there that, just dissolved the pain and made it go away. He actually embraced it and endured it. And I think that this is very important with this whole thing of, okay, so what you've done is you've said, okay, we can either approach this as though our wife is a problem or to be solved, or she has a problem that needs to be solved.
Yes.
Rather than just not looking at any of it as a problem, but looking at her as a person.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now this is the key. How do I advise men, or myself particularly, is like, man, I can't solve my wife. She is a mystery beyond mysteries. And there's a lot of
Amen.
jokes about this. Like the boy who
Preach it,
comes
brother.
back, he's like, Dad, did you know in other countries, men don't even know their wives until they get married? He's like, son, that happens in every country. You know, so the point here is this, is that women are a mystery in a very good way, but it perplexes us. But we have to have that understanding is, look, she's a mystery that cannot be solved. She's master of her own mystery, as John Paul II says. What we are there to do is to discover her. So how do you do this? You can't solve a heart, but you can apply mercy to it. And so what we're doing here is we're listening for her heart. And that's why what you're saying, like Bob Schutz and Greg, repeating back to them, I find this fascinating. Is like, my wife will say something. I said, so you were saying that? No, that's not what I said. I'm saying,
yes.
Okay. So you're saying, no, I'm not saying. Okay. So what do you, and eventually what I find out is, no matter how many times I repeat what she's saying, I'm missing what her heart is saying. And what her heart is saying is, I just want you to really listen and hear me, and then love me and apply your merciful gaze right where I'm at.
That's right.
And I think that this is so counterintuitive for us as men, because that's not what we want to do at all. It's like, I don't have the patience to just, this is in my humanity. I don't have the patience just to listen for your heart and to find out where you're at emotionally and, all that. I have like 5 seconds here before I've got to do this thing and then that thing, and I'm on a schedule. So we're solving you right now, babe. And she's like, no, you're not. No, you're not. So what we need to do is to listen to her heart. We have to look for those verbal cues, but also those behavioral cues that are saying things that are beyond her words. And then we can ask. We can say, look, I think a big question back to that thing is like, hey, tell me how you feel about that. Like, why? Explain to me. And I like to say, look, I'm stupid here. Just explain to me why that's bothering you.
Yeah.
And I just think, like James says in 119, be quick to hear and slow to speak and slow to anger, right? So quick to hear, buddy. I got 2 ears, 1 mouth. That means you should be doing twice as much listening as you are talking. And so I think that we just need to be like, hey, so tell me why you're feeling like that, and release the control and look for her heart.
That's right. Our wives need a man that can rest in the tension and the unknown with her instead of trying to solve her, instead of trying to solve it.
So that's the cross. So Christ didn't flee from the pain and the tension, right? He remained for a long time, terribly torment. We have this on like a grain of sand, microscopic scale in this, and we're in this tension and we want out, we want to solve it. We don't want to hear about it. It's just, because that's the problem. What happens to me, this is me personally, is I know I can't solve this. So as my wife is relating what's happening to her and how she's feeling, I am thinking, I cannot solve this. She said this many times before, and therefore I just want to be done with this, right?
Yes.
And so I want to flee from the tension. I want to flee from the internal pain and the cross. And the Lord is just saying, no, I want you to cling to me on the cross and give her your eyes, look in her eyes, give her your ears, and be patient with her. And it's interesting. There's many things that happen. You're winning souls with Christ. You're delivering souls from purgatory with Christ. And you're loving your wife in a way that Christ loves her, by paying attention to her and affirming her, even though you can't solve her problem.
I'm beginning to realize that I do this podcast to fix my marriage. No, this is so good, because as much as I've read a book from Bob Schutz 5 years ago, and I've had Dr. Greg Bottaro on my show, and I've practiced these things, right? Yeah. Hearing you talk right there was I don't want to say confronting, but it was definitely opening me up to the awareness how recently, in even just the last few weeks, I haven't been practicing this.
Well,
And
join the club. I
and
mean, the only reason I can talk about it
yeah,
is because I make these mistakes all the time,
ex-
all the
exactly.
time, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh gosh,
Oh man, it's just that it's so good. So let's move on to the second point here. Well, really the third. The
Third.
third in this conversation now is avoiding conflict is avoiding resolution. And so I want to kind of frame this. And so I have reminds me of St. John Paul II in his letter to the families, where he said, authentic communication is not abstract. It is always rooted in relationships and directed toward communion.
Nice.
And so
That's a
very
that's
often,
that's a great quote.
it is.
Can you just read it again?
Yeah, I
That
will.
is so solid.
So authentic communication is not abstract. It is always rooted in relationships and directed toward communion. And so we often find ourselves, as you were just saying, Devin, and I've experienced countless times, is that we realize we can't solve something. We realize that's not what she's looking for. We realize the last dozen times we've attempted to do this in different ways, they've just been like misinterpreted or at worst, accusatory and combative. And so we avoid it. We just are like, you know what? When she brings this to me, I have something else I have to do, right? And so we try and move away. We try and keep ourselves separated from that, instead of resting in the tension, instead of going and initiating this conversation, instead of being aware of where she's at emotionally, being aware of the time of day. That's a huge one, right? Like my wife and I both know, and we've come to an agreement, and it happened last night, where we're like, not the time. And we were in good spirits, and a big issue came up. And I said, oh yeah, that's right. We absolutely have to do that. This is not the time, right? It's like 10 o'clock at night. And she was completely in agreement. So because we've had these conversations in our marriage countless times, that 10 o'clock at night is not the time to solve big issues. When you're tired, you're exhausted, you are empty, from the weary travels of the day. And so so
John,
please.
so the don't. So what we want to do as men, this is the don't. We want to avoid the conflict. We want to avoid. Okay, we know something's not right in the relationship, or she's not feeling well. There's something going on, and what we do is we just kind of want to like pretend it doesn't exist. That's what you're talking about. That's the don't. So the do you're talking about is, hey, we've got to initiate some kind of open dialogue here. Is that correct?
That's correct. Okay. That's exactly right. That's the third point here. And because relationships are always directed towards communion, right? And if we are not in conversation, right, or in communication, as John Paul II stated, we're just trying to avoid that. We're not building the foundation of relationships, right, which are directed towards communion and require this sort of communication. So we have to be aware, and we have to pray and peacefully, think through things. But then we have to initiate them when our wife is in, an emotionally good place, and where it's not, the timing is there. And when you are in a good place, right? Don't get me wrong. Like if you're thinking Saturday morning is the perfect time to talk about this, and you wake up and a kid just threw up on you, and you had a rough night's sleep because another kid was fighting you, you could change gear shift. Like, don't enter into that situation just because you set this check mark in your brain and you're inflexible. So
so this is very important because resentment is one of the biggest factors of failing marriages. And resentment breeds in silent darkness of unmet needs. Okay? Yeah. So resentment breeds in the silent darkness of unmet needs. So what happens is one or both the spouses have unmet needs. They have some kind of expectation or hope that the other spouse will come through for them in this area. And, we can get into that other one, that idea of expectations in a minute. But when that goes unchecked, then we start to say, man, you know what? he or she isn't in it for me. And then I personally, I've done this. I've become resentful. I don't say anything, or I notice that she's kind of distant or cold. And I'm like, don't want to go there. It'll work itself out. No, it won't.
It'll work
No,
itself out. Oh,
no,
the
it
amount
won't.
of times I
Yeah,
have thought that.
Kim and
Oh,
I, we were on a trip to Michigan. We hardly get away, and it was like this kind of like we were so excited. We finally were getting away for a couple days, and we're going to sit on the beach in Lake Michigan. It was just going to be great, and we were super excited about it. And then as it, how these trips are when you haven't done something like this in a while, then you have like these high expectations and hopes of what it's going to bring. For the woman, it's more intimacy and closeness. Maybe for the man, in my case, maybe physical intimacy or whatever,
yeah,
right? You're
yeah,
kind of like looking forward to all this stuff.
yeah.
And but it's like a heavy burden. It really is, because then you start to like worry that the other person isn't thinking the same way as you are. And then there's like this tension that builds, at least sometimes. And we were on this trip and we're driving the car, and ironically, we were listening to Bob and Jake talk about marriage.
Oh,
And
ironic. Yeah.
oh my gosh. And everything seemed to be okay. But then after we were done listening to like the second
Oh
episode,
no.
it's like she went silent on me, and I'm like, And so I kind of fall, I'm not okay, I'm not going to go there, and then the silent builds and it builds. 2 more hours of this drive. By the time we get to our place, you can tell there's like massive tension now, and we're not even talking. And then it's like, hey, you want to go to the beach? Yeah, let's go to the beach. We're walking, and I don't know what happened. I said something really stupid as usual, and boom, she was walking ahead of me, and we ended up sitting on different sides of the beach.
Ooh.
And that was our first night on this vacation. And so that resentment, that silence, that's the abdication of Adam in the garden. It's this Simon the Pharisee who, like, is thinking in his heart, man, if this guy, this prophet knew what kind of woman this was, he's saying inside, he's not even approaching Jesus, say, Jesus, you know who she is. He's not but Jesus, he goes right for it. He says, Simon, he just calls him on it. We have to be like initiating and say, hey, look, I noticed there's a tension here. Did I do something wrong? Are you okay? What's going on? And you'll give her the space to at least talk about it. She says, no, nothing. Okay. All right. I'm going to believe you. And then I'm going to try to, and then if I notice it's continuing, are you sure there's nothing wrong? Cause I really love you and I really want this to be a good vacation, whatever.
Oh, lead with that. Charity is so helpful. I noticed that with all relationships, right? Leading with charity. And actually, it's one of the things that I do here in my job as chief marketing officer when I'm coaching individuals is I very often see them looking at people that are below them in their org chart, and they forget that they're people.
No,
And so they
gosh.
have
Yeah.
to correct something. And so they just set up a one-on-one meeting. It's accusatory. It comes off like that person is trying to defend themselves or reaching with assertion. And it literally changes the whole conversation when you're just like, hey, I really appreciate all the work that you're doing. I'm glad that you're here, and I needed to present something to you, but I know that you can take it. Actually, that's why I'm here to have this conversation with you, because you've shown time and time again how great you are at X. So this situation happened. And if you just frame something like that, it just opens up the dialogue. It's not about, fear or threats. And I just saw that parallel right with what you were saying, Devin.
Well, yeah. And I
It's,
think that you can apply that a little bit. I mean, you got to be careful that you're not.
yeah, don't say, I know you can take this. Don't do
Yeah,
that to your
that's
wife.
a bad move in a
Yeah,
marriage. But also
exactly.
it shows that works in the corporate world, because
Yeah.
someone has to have like that definite authoritative kind of level speaking to the person. But in marriage, it can't be that. I cannot come off as though, hey, look, I've been, like as though I'm the authority, even though I'm the spiritual authority, but I cannot be talking down to my wife. She's equal in dignity, right? So I think that, but I like how you let off. It's like with this, I'm seeing the good in you.
Yes.
Like, babe, you're an incredible wife. You do so much for us. I'm just worried that maybe you're getting a little worn out, and I've noticed I'm feeling that there's distance here. Is that right? And so like what you've done there is I've acknowledged her goodness, and and then I've noticed, and I've said, I've noticed all the things you're doing. And now I'm saying, I care about how you're feeling. Are you tired? I notice there's some distance. Notice those three things. Acknowledge her goodness. Notice what she's done. And then third, I'm worried and concerned about you because I noticed that you're tired or whatever. Is that real? And let her talk about it. By doing that, you've put her in this place of exaltation where you say, look, I think you're great. And I'm just worried about you.
Yeah, excellent. And actually, let's move right on to the fourth point here, because you mentioned that awesome comment about unmet expectations, and that is the fourth point here is that I wrote it down as unspoken expectations, but it's this. Yes, it's this notion, let me just say it, don't do this, right, is that you don't play the guessing game or blame her for not doing it right? So that's the don't. If you loved me, you would have known.
Yes.
Right? Never lead with that. Never assume that. Never,
because we know when we get married, we instantly are given the gift to be mind readers.
Yes, mind readers, exactly. We're all enlightened and all wise. And so then the do this, I put, say what you need, ask what she needs, and actually let's reverse that. It's ask what she needs. I really like that. We're coming back to this. And in that we can come to a resolution. There was something that, again, when you were bringing up expectations, that really, you hear the mantra that comparison is the enemy of joy. And there's a lot of truth to that. But I actually think expectations can also be the enemy of joy as well. If we rely on expectations, if we hope in expectations, then we are going to be let down. And
let's dissect that. That's really good. That's really good, because I've gotten in this conversation with people, especially in the charismatic movement. They say we're supposed to pray with expectation. And I'm like, okay, I get that. But I think that we should pray with hope, because expectation is this idea that you're going to give me what I expect, what I want. I have this vision. You're going to do this for me. That's expectation. Hope is, I have this desire and I'm going to share it with you. And I've got this virtue, this power, this hope. I believe in you enough that you're going to try to address that need. That's a much different kind of relational scenario. You know what I mean? And so I think that you're right. Expectations, especially when they're unexpressed, when no one's talked about them, and you've got, so guys, a lot of guys, we get married young. Guys who get married young, we have a lot of testosterone and we have high sex drive. And our wives initially do too, generally speaking. And we've talked about this before. After childbirth, shifting of hormones, things change. And so we have this, a lot of guys, I've talked to so many guys, this isn't like rocket science. So I, somebody in the comments go, that's not true. Okay, whatever. Okay, for 15, 20%, maybe it's not true, but
less than that. Yeah, for sure.
What happens is that the man has this expectation that sex is going to be like it was in the first 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is. But then that stops happening, or it starts to decline. And then pretty soon it's declining so much that it's like almost like an absence of it. But yet he's not brave enough or courageous enough to enter into that conversation, that dialogue, to say, hey, I love you so much. You've been such a great wife. I just, with our sexual relationship, obviously, I love it. I love you. I love having intercourse with you. Is there something going on there? Do you want to talk about it? And she might just say, man, I'm just so burnt out. I'm just so tired. Or, you know what? My hormones have shifted. I just don't feel like that anymore. Okay, well, okay, great. So how can we work through this? Because I have this need and you don't have it as much now. So how can we work through this? But notice what's happening there is this vulnerability, this exposing of my heart, this exposing of the need. That's so important, because that's what couples don't do. Couples don't expose their true needs, their authentic needs to one another in a diplomatic dialogue without being accusatory and blaming. When that doesn't happen, when we can't express needs and we don't express needs, then what we're doing is we're living in the world of unmet expectations. They're all hidden. And then that's where the resentment breeds and builds. And that's where the stonewalling grows out of that. And pretty soon we're finding ourselves in court hating that person on the other side saying, I want a divorce.
Yeah. And I think that's just it. The man who's not going to lovingly, like you just expressed, make those expectations known is leading in that direction. It's a trap that no one's going to ever be able to win. And yeah,
It's not just, it's not fair. A guy who, let's say the woman is a stay-at-home mom and the guy gets frustrated because the house isn't clean, right? And yet he's never discussed that need with his wife. It is not fair to get upset or to be resentful or go into silent mode because she's not doing that when you've never talked to her about it and asked her if that's something she can even do, and with all the kids or whatever, or getting upset about a lack of coitus. When you've never talked about it or addressed it, that's completely unjust and unfair, right?
Agreed. And I think, can you say that expectations comment that you made earlier on, where it breeds unmet expectations breed in the darkness?
Yeah. So basically, yes, the unmet expectations. So if we have internal expectations that we haven't expressed, that turns into resentment. Now, the resentment breeds in silent darkness of unmet needs. Resentment breeds in silent darkness of unmet needs. So wherever we have unmet needs, and it could be that we've expressed them, but that's where the resentment builds, man. And it's so diabolical.
It's so true. I think that's why it just struck me so much. And I think every gentleman, even every wife and mom that's listening to this show right now is,
expressing needs is where we're most vulnerable and exposing ourselves. But it is the most vulnerable aspect of marital communication, but it's the most essential.
Excellent. So moving ahead, and I think it's a great segue to the last point here. Number 5 is this is a little bit of a change up than the other 4, but it's lack of prayer and lack of positive conversations. Okay, and so what do I mean by that? And I think this is so helpful to remember that, don't do this. Don't let every conversation resolve around problems, around parenting kids, around complaints and stuff like that. But instead, we have to set the tone as the heads of our family. We have to set the tones, love by leading and lead by loving, where we are talking about things spiritually and having conversations of joy and time of rest with our spouses, that we go on date nights, like we talked about how to have great date nights in another episode, because we have to build that relationship. And when we become separated with our spouse, then the only time we come together is when we're expressing these unneeded expectations, right? And like we're just pushing those on. And so that has to be balanced. And we have to find time to talk about the joys of life, to talk about the grace that we've received in this moment or that moment throughout the day, to share in that love and that fellowship with our spouse on a more regular basis than just talking about all the difficult things. And this goes back into all the traps that men fall into, of like choosing work over their family, choosing rules over the relationship. All of these things that we talk about just keep on coming back full front to this, is like we are called to live in communion with our wife. And in living in communion with our wife, it's not always difficulties. It's not all struggles. It's not always I'm the head and she's the body and she needs to do what I'm saying. And, she's the helper and like all of these things, right? It's like, who wants to live like that? But because of the world, because of our own natural temptations, and because of Satan, and because of this hamster wheel that we find ourselves on, it's so often that we become distant from having these great moments with our spouse. And it's in those great moments that we're reminded of the love that we have, and the love that's frankly exponentially greater year over year with our wife through the struggles and difficulties that we've survived and we've gone through together, than just all the difficulties that we just keep on going back at. So
marriage, the way it's designed, because you're around the other person, at least you should be a lot more than any other person in your life. It has the tendency to either become implosive or expansive. And the key factor as to whether or not it becomes implosive, negative, or expansive, positive, is if we are thinking hopeful and encouraging, or if we're thinking condemnational, critical, judgmental of the world and the people around us. So for example, my wife and I, we just had this terrible situation where um, it was a legal situation, and it was all we talked about, and it was just so negative. But it just became all consuming in our conversation. It was like we forgot about everything else that was good in our life. And so negative thinking and talking becomes a devilish echo chamber it's the cause of our brain's insanity. It's like
Yeah.
running around in a room, a circular room that has no doors, looking for the door, and there's no way out. You keep going over the same arguments, same discussions, trying to find an answer, and yet you're never going to find one. And you got to find the door out into a new conversation and positive thinking. And hey, let's talk about doing something fun with the kids, or something fun with the grandkids, or hey, what happened good at work today? It's like when we focus on the negative thinking, it just keeps devolving and devolving. And then actually what's so sad about it, I think, and this is the end game, is then we associate our partner, our spouse, with that negative thinking and the negative
Mm-hmm.
feelings of that discussion. And then eventually we don't want to be around that spouse.
That's right. It
So
gets so deep when we do that. Yeah, continue.
yeah. So no, but so what we got to do is we've got to breathe. My wife's great at this. She's like, hey, what can we do to have some fun with the grandkids? And so now suddenly we're on a project. Oh, we're like zip line maybe, in the backyard, or let's get these water gun thing, like whatever. She's like, oh, let's
Yeah.
have them over to. And so like there's this thinking of expansion, and it's not like, oh, we're boring grandparents and I got these health issues. Did you know I got this health issue? And here I'm talking about this health issue again. And it's like,
I love
oh,
this.
we're already 6 feet under, we just haven't put the
Yeah.
top of the coffin. It's just like, I think we, as married couples, we need to look to potential and partnership. What is the potential of something we can do, and partnering? How can we do that together? And that's where that expansion takes place. So it could be just a part of your yard or your land. It's like, hey, babe, let's work on this together. What can we do there? Or hey, or simple as, I was thinking about, restructuring the garage. What do
Yeah.
you help me out with that? Or like, hey, you want something huge? Let's redo the kitchen. But it's this potential in partnership rather than looking at problems. It's like, that's the difference. The problems, and you keep talking about them negatively, and those people and those problems, and I hate those people, and you're just,
It's
there's
so
no
true.
expansion.
I love it. What a great way to end this conversation. Thank you, Devin. You gave me a lot to think about too. And I want to encourage all the guys that are listening to take on that approach and that understanding of setting up projects, right? Like what a beautiful way to touch on a man's heart, but at the same time connect with a woman's heart, right? Because she wants to be on this journey with you, and so you're setting up a project that others are going to benefit in your life, and you're doing together. I think it's great.
She might have the vision for the project, but she
Yeah,
says, I know that you can fulfill it. I know that you can come through for me on this. And so then that's like that both and, where the guy feels like, yeah, I can be the man here, and you've got this vision, rather than looking at like a honeydew list. I mean,
yeah,
so there's this
amen.
project and potential in partnership. Yeah,
Right.
usually it's involved in a project. Yeah.
Oh, so excellent. Well, I'm really grateful for all of our listeners here. If you have a question for us, shoot it to us at podcast@catholicgentleman.com. We love answering those. I love seeing those. And I'm just really grateful for every listener and all your prayers. And so we're at a point in this episode here where we talk about putting on the new man. And this putting on the new man is our challenge every week. And so the putting on the new man this week is twofold. The first one is, and intentionally because I don't want to presume on your marriage and where it's at, is that you are going to be called to talk to the Holy Spirit for the next 7 days and ask the Holy Spirit where in your marriage, within these conversations and these disagreements and stuff, can you step up and can you be better? So I want you to talk to the Holy Spirit. We've given you this layout here we'd probably talked about 7 or 8. I know there was 5, ordered ones, but there's definitely a lot of excellent things stated. So I want you to talk to the Holy Spirit, and I want you to enter into that conversation with the Holy Spirit this week, specifically about communicating better, because I tell you what, until we're 6 feet under, there's always room for improvement.
Oh,
and so I want you to have that dialogue with the Holy Spirit. The second challenge is to go on a date with your wife. This is that positive. This is that number 5. I want to lean into that. I want to lean into the positive. Devin, one of the things, and the phrasing is not quite hitting me, but there's a no argument zone, right? There's a no tough conversation zone when we go on dates. How have you phrased that in the past?
I just make date night kind of a safe zone in which
safe zone.
Just where I'm not gonna, well, first of all, I'm not gonna comment on her weight. I'm not gonna comment negatively on, how she looks. Those are
Agreed.
Basics. I'm not gonna goggle, look at other women.
Never.
These are basic stuff. But the big thing is I'm going to assure her positively of her beauty. I'm going to assure her that she's still the most beautiful woman in my world. I'm going to sit across that table, look her in the eyes, and listen to her. And I'm just going to let her talk, and again, without solving her. She's not a problem. She's a person. A person needs to be listened to, but I'm going to listen for her heart. But I think the big thing about date night is just it's consistent, and you're demonstrating by your consistency and putting that phone away that she is the most important person in your world besides God. And when she feels that consistently, she's going to make you the most important person in her world, usually, except for God. And that's when that communication leads to communion, because now you've got a context, which is date night. You've got the context in which you communicate, which leads to communion. And it's an art. And I think at times you're going to get in fights. There's just it's impossible not to, or you're going to touch upon a subject that's, oh man, we shouldn't have gone there. What I do in that case is I pull back and I'm like, you know what? I overstepped. I'm sorry. And I claim my blame.
Me too.
I'm just like, hey, I did this. Will you? And right there, I'm like, will you forgive me? Because I love you and I love a relationship way more than being right or talking about this. You know what I mean?
Excellent. Yeah. So good. And so that's the putting on new man this week. The Holy Spirit, talk to him for the next 7 days. If you have a journal that you take to prayer, put that in it on the header. If you are struggling because you don't have a journal, then at breakfast or at lunch, right, remind yourself that as you do your prayers for food, then you're going to finish it with this prayer to the Holy Spirit about opening up the communication. And you are going to take your wife on a date night that includes a safe zone. You're not going to have tough, difficult conversations with your wife. You're just going to enjoy being together. We talked about a lot of our previous episodes, so I'm going to put those in the show notes as well. We talked about a handful of our episodes that we've done on date nights and how to talk to your wife about sex and these sort of things. So I'm going to put those in the show notes as well. If you like those or those interest you, click down there. And as we end each of our episodes,
be a man, be a saint.